What is happening is that Judge Scott McAfee is dismissing several of the charges here in Georgia against former President Donald Trump. 6 of the charges.
Yes, good news for Donald Trump in one of his cases, at least. This is, of course, the Fulton County investigation into him and a number of other co-conspirators' efforts to overturn the results of that election. The Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee has tossed out 6 of the counts against former President Donald Trump and the co-defendants, 3 of them specific to Donald Trump, 3 of them affecting the co-defendants as well. But there are still quite a few charges remaining, so Donald Trump, don't celebrate just yet. And if you're feeling a little bit down as a result of this news, there is a very important caveat that I feel like is being downplayed by the media. So we're gonna get to that in just a sec. But I wanna let you know about what these charges that are now being vacated are and why the judge is doing this. Because you might think, oh, this is another one of those things where the judge is trying to side with Trump. Maybe, maybe not. We're gonna dive into the evidence. So the 3 that are being vacated against Trump and the 3 others have to do with soliciting elected officials to violate their oaths of office. 2 of them for Trump have to do with the phone call, the perfect phone call that he had with Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, back on January 2nd, 2021, where he asked him to find him exactly the number of votes he needs to win the election. Now, a lot of people see that and think, if anything is soliciting elected officials to violate their oaths of office, that has got to be it, right? But the interesting thing is the judge doesn't necessarily disagree. So here's what the judge said. The court's concern is less that the state has failed to allege sufficient conduct of the defendants. In fact, it has alleged an abundance. Doesn't mean that he buys the evidence, but they've presented a lot, which is good news. However, the lack of detail concerning an essential legal element is, in the undersigned's opinion, fatal. As written, these 6 counts contain all the essential elements of the crimes, but fail to allege sufficient detail regarding the nature of their commission, i.e. the underlying felony solicited. So basically saying, what exactly is the crime that the violation of the oath is supposed to be going towards? But while that's frustrating, and in particular, whenever it's like, yeah, no, it certainly seems like he did it, but like there's some technicality that you need to deal with or whatever. That's really frustrating. But it's not fatally frustrating in this case because the judge points out that the prosecution can theoretically refile the charges with additional details. Now, that does not mean that he's then going to accept them, but it does mean that these charges are not simply dead forever. So don't get too depressed about that. And Trump still faces a half dozen other charges that were not vacated. So a little bit of good news for Donald Trump, and we have to give him his due on that, but potentially some bad news and potential updates to come. Sharon, what are your thoughts?
When I first heard it, I said, wow, this judge is overruling a grand jury. Grand jury said this is the case here. It wasn't like an information or something like that. But once you dig deeper into this, you say, well, listen, can you imagine being on trial with a dozen charges against you and a judge throws out 6 and you're still facing a huge uphill battle? That's all that happened here. I think he's a reasoned judge. It gives me pause that he's only 34, but this was well thought out. And as you said, she can refile this. Will she need to? Doubt it. But will she? Maybe.
He's 34.
He's only 34. Can you believe it?
How is he? He's a judge and he's 34?
34, appointed by Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia. And yeah, 34 years old.
What am I doing with my life? Anyway, how is that even possible?
I'm not sure. He is.
You know what? I'm back 34. To not trusting him. That's too young. Anyway,
he's got 2 kids. Does that help? 2 young kids. Okay.
A little. Does he accept them regardless of their life choices? But also, he literally can't be president, but he is a judge.
Right.
So that is interesting. So he can rule on a president, but he can't be a president. That is very weird.
You got it.
How did you know that anyway?
I just read a lot and just said, wow. Okay. See, I've got to do more. I've got to keep more. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely do. Yeah, I get frustrated enough when I see like really like successful like wrestlers in WWE. They're like 28 and I'm like, oh God, I'm so much older than that. But like a judge, Jesus. Yeah.